Okay, Independence Live, David here. I am live tonight with Mr. Ethical himself, Nicholas Wilson. Nicholas Wilson's the best known as the HSBC whistleblower. Goes by the Twitter name Mr. Ethical. So, Nicholas, how are you tonight?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good, David, thanks.
Excellent. So, I mean, we've got quite a long story to go on about here. A lot of it's quite negative and quite upsetting, but I do gather that you have got some recent good news, which you did announce on your blog just yesterday.
Yeah, things are looking up. Recently, I made a complaint against the Financial Conduct Authority because basically they covered up this fraud and colluded with HSBC. So I made a complaint to the Complaints Commissioner, and he upheld my complaint. And as a result of that, the FCA have agreed that they will reopen their investigation. They will now look at taking regulatory action against HSBC. Yesterday they sent me an apology. I mean, the apology is worthless to me. It came from the company secretary rather than the CEO or the chairman, and it's mealy-mouthed apology. They hate me. And in fact, usually whenever a complaint against the FCA is upheld, they make an ex gratia payment to the complainant. Not in my case. and the Complaints Commissioner said this was the worst complaint he's had against them. They don't like me, but it's good news because they now, in the public gaze, they have to take action against HSBC. Well, they don't have to. They might decide they're still not going to take any action. But I won't give up.
Okay. So the reasons to feel reasonably positive, at least for the moment. Okay.
Yeah, for the moment.
So anyway, how was it you actually got into all of this? So I understand that you began as a musician. Is that right? Moved into law.
Yeah, I used to write music. I went to music college and art college, but I ended up in the law to pay my rent. And the best time in my life was when I had a 3-day job in the law and I was writing music for people like Peter Greenaway, and I had a good life. And then I ended up working full time in the law again. But I'd acted for John Lewis for many years, John Lewis Partnership. And then they sold their accounts to HFC Bank, which is a subsidiary of HSBC. And immediately they sold their accounts. HFC or HSBC started adding illegal charges to the accounts. And I refused to do the work. I complained constantly. That's why I'm called Mr. Ethical, because my bosses called me Mr. Ethical when I kept saying, it's illegal. What you're doing is illegal. You're not supposed to be doing it. So to cut a long story short, I ended up reporting them to the Law Society. So they immediately sacked me. And basically, I haven't worked since, but I have since been campaigning because it's about £1 billion fraud. About 500,000 people are affected, and I want them to get their money back, and I want some people to go to prison, basically, because it's fraud.
Yeah. I mean, how did that feel to be in that position and to be basically having to say I can't be a part of this, and then to have the rip taken by employers calling you Mr. Ethical in a sarcastic tone?
Well, it was hell. I mean, I'd just bought a house. Yeah. I mean, I won the contract for the firm. They'd never heard of HFC Bank, but because I was negotiating with John Lewis and talking to the bank, and it was a fait accompli, and I announced to the firm that I'd got this contract. And on the strength of it, I bought a house for the first time in my life, in Tottenham, in London, which is reasonably cheap at that time. So when this illegality thing, when I realised they weren't going to change it, I knew that as soon as I blew the whistle, they'd sack me. So I knew it was a very, very risky thing to do, but I couldn't do it. I mean, I was going to court. I specialised myself I was the head of department, but I specialised in insolvency law, and I was going to the High Court virtually every day, where the judges knew me. I was doing bankruptcy cases, and I wasn't going to go in front of these judges that knew me with these new bankruptcy cases with illegal charges added onto them suddenly. I wasn't prepared to explain these to a judge because I knew they were illegal. So I refused to do the work. And anyway, I was sacked, and that was the beginning of... it was 12 years ago that I told the bank what they were doing was illegal. At the first meeting, the bank they said, because I worried we'd lose the John Lewis work, because obviously they already had solicitors. But they said you can do the John Lewis work so long as you do it on the same basis as our other solicitors. And the solicitor explained what that basis was, and I said, that's illegal. You're not allowed to do that. But that was the beginning of all my problems, basically.
But surely you weren't the only person with the knowledge that this was an illegal practice.
Well,
what about the judges and everyone else in the legal system? I mean,
well, there were other partners at the firm I worked that knew it was illegal, and they also sent emails to the senior management saying this is illegal. I'm not happy about it, but they were ignored. And whenever it went to on my website, there's examples of cases that when they go to court, or if any, what they did was they were adding 16.4% onto debts, regardless of any work they had to do. So if you had a £10,000 debt, they'd add £1,640 on top of your debt to cover their legal costs, regardless of whatever work they did. But if any debtor challenged that and said, what's this charge all about, they would drop it because they knew it was illegal. And if it went to court, they would drop it. I mean, there's a letter from, there were two firms. I worked for a firm called Wakeman's, and there was another firm called Reston's who were doing it. I mean, there's a letter on my website from Reston's to the court saying, we're dropping that part of the claim. We're not going to be pursuing that. They always dropped it if it was going to go before a judge because they knew it was illegal. I mean, that's what makes it fraud. If if you add charges onto a debt in the hope that the person is ignorant of the law, and the hope that they don't understand the law, and the hope that they will pay it, that is fraud. There's no question about it. It's theft and it's fraud. And it was illegal for two reasons. It was in breach of the solicitor's rules on claiming for costs which are not due, and it was what's called a legal contingency fee, which I'd rather not go into because it's boring, but it's a contingency fee which was illegal.
So the resistance that was put up by yourself and the others who made complaints in written form, I mean, obviously there was only so much you were going to be able to press before they got rid of you. So, I mean, was there any power? Was there any power within you or your colleagues to actually do anything to stop this?
No, as soon as I started
publicize it.
Well, as soon as I started complaining about it, they took all the work away. Wakeman's have many offices around the country, and I was in their London office. And as soon as I started complaining about it, they started taking the work away from me. They started socializing with the bank, with the client, without inviting me. They basically cut me out of the whole project because I kept complaining that it was illegal. And then they sacked my whole team. I was head of department of a team in London. They made my whole team redundant on 1 day's notice. And then they took all the work up to Liverpool. And originally, when we were just doing the John Lewis work, there were 5 of us in London. Now there's over 70 people doing this work in Liverpool because that's how much work I brought into the firm. That's how much value there was in the client. But as I say, in 1 year I calculated that between Reston's and Wakeman's they added £44 million in illegal charges in the year that I blew the whistle in 2006. And that would have been more in 2007, 2008, until they were told to stop doing it by the Office of Fair Trading. But that's the level of it.
So even internally, would you believe you were being controlled by debt? In terms of you bought a house, you needed to pay a mortgage, you needed to work.
Yeah, it destroyed me. I mean, after I blew the whistle, I knew I had rights under it's called PIDA, the Public Interest Disclosure Act. I knew I'd be protected because I was a whistleblower, but that act is useless. It doesn't protect anybody because everybody thinks whistleblowing is some kind of glamorous. People know about Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, and they think it's some kind of glamorous Secret Service type film or something. It's hell because if you do it properly, then you have to whistleblow to the regulators. You have to go through certain channels. I mean, I did it internally. They ignored me. So then I went to the Law Society. But then the Law Society covered it up too. I mean, it's been covered up by every single regulator.
Yeah.
So there's no point in blowing the whistle if all the regulators are going to cover it up. Is it?
So,
Sorry.
okay, but this is where the role of the media it comes into play, because it's through the media that these firms and the regulators and the authorities need to be held up and held to account. So, what's been your experience of working with the media to try and get this get this message across?
Well, let me tell you
Take a
this.
minute, breathe.
Well, recently there was a survey done in the Times where they asked people what were the most trusted professions, 1 to 10. So at the top were things like doctors, teachers, and so on. But 8, 9, 10. 8 was lawyers, 9 was bankers, and 10 was journalists. I've dealt with all 3 over the last 12 years, and the worst of the lot are journalists. They are arrogant. There are some exceptions, independent journalists who have been very supportive and have done a great job. But I'm talking about mainstream journalists, specifically the BBC. They are arrogant. They are patronising. They are lazy, and a lot of them are pretty stupid, to be honest. I'm furious with the media, but I'm sure we're going to be going on to this because, the head of the BBC is an HSBC director. They are completely under the thumb of the banks.
Yeah.
So I have been talking to the media. I had the very first meeting with a guy called Mike Radford from ITN News in 2006, I think it was. And to be fair to him, he was very interested. And at that time, I wasn't quite ready I still hadn't been sacked at this point, so I wasn't quite ready to go public with it. And he said, well, when you're ready, let me know. But, to give you an idea, so that was 10 years ago. But still, to this day, there has been nothing on mainstream media. The press last week, or just before Christmas, reported the Complaints Commissioner decision. The Guardian, Times and Financial Times reported that. But they only report things when there's an official document like that for them to wave around and say, oh, we're safe, we can't be sued. But my website's full of official documents that prove this fraud. It's a joke.
Yeah, I think people one day are going to wake up to what the mainstream media are actually all about. We're talking here about like the Guardian. The Guardian was considered to be sort of left wing. It was quite open, and
long time ago.
These people are actually in the pocket of HSBC. I think on your website you've got a very good spider graph of the interconnected relationships between HSBC, the establishment, the mainstream media, etc. And you can see the push and pull of interest, and why that's never going to be an outlet of truth. It's only ever going to be, as we've had to describe before, customer services for the establishment.
Yeah, the Guardian. I think the Guardian have changed now because of their Swiss leaks story earlier last year. But up until then, the Guardian received more money for advertising than any other newspaper. They were from HSBC. They had a sponsorship deal with HSBC. There was a website called Horizons, which was all about how to maximize your tax affairs if you are expatriate, which was sponsored by HSBC. They had this huge deal, and the Guardian claims to be like an independent thing with the Scott Trust. The Scott Trust is a limited company, and the chairman of the Guardian, a woman called Liz Forgan, she's also the patron of a charity called St Giles Trust that recently got a £30 million donation from HSBC Bank. They are up to their necks in HSBC. Although I think they lost the account, the advertising account, over the Swiss leaks. Certainly HSBC suspended the advertising during that period, and I think they might have lost it. But they still haven't reported anything about this. I've been contacting the Guardian for years and years and years.
Yeah.
They're all compromised, particularly the Telegraph. Famously, Peter Oborne left the Telegraph last year because he said it was a fraud on the British public that they were not reporting HSBC crimes. But let's talk about the BBC. They are the worst.
Yeah,
Shall
okay,
we?
so Rona Fairhead, in fact, is being sued over allegations that HSBC funded terrorist and drug cartel money whilst she was on the Bankers Risk Committee.
Yeah.
So, I mean, up to their necks is a very good way of putting this. She was also appointed as what's her position with the BBC, but she was appointed there by David Cameron himself. David Cameron has even made two of the HSBC directors lords. So, we can the way in which everyone is in everyone else's under the influence of everyone else. It's actually, I mean, it should be illegal. I mean, seriously.
Well, I mean, if I explain the way Rona Fairhead was appointed last year, I think you probably find it is illegal.
Okay.
I certainly think her appointment was unlawful. What happened was last year, I mean, there is a blog on my website which covers all this called Smoking Gun. What happened last year, there's a supporter of mine, a very helpful guy called Ben Tomio, and he wrote an email to the Financial Conduct Authority and to John Lewis about this fraud. And he copied in Joe Johnson, who is his MP. Joe Johnson is the brother of Boris Johnson. He copied him in. At that time last year, beginning of last year, Joe Johnson was in the policy unit at number 10 Downing Street. And he got and this was, I think, March, April last year. And he got a reply from Joe Johnson's secretary or whoever saying, Joe Johnson has read these emails. Shortly after that, David Cameron had a private meeting with John Lewis. And he had a private meeting with the BBC. I mean, I don't know what that was about, but all the evidence on my website is circumstantial, but that's just as good as direct evidence. Basically, if you see somebody going into a house with a gun and coming out, you hear a shot and that person comes out of the house with a gun and there's somebody dead being shot in the house, that's circumstantial. It's not direct evidence, but you can be pretty sure they killed that person. So then... number 10 was aware of this. And then it was last year the famous cut and paste job with the FCA. The FCA and HSBC, I did a Freedom of Information Act request at the FCA saying, what have you done about my complaint? And what they did was asked HSBC what to say to me, how to reply. And HSBC sent this text saying, oh, we were allowed to have these charges. Our terms and conditions allowed us to have these charges. And the FCA sent that to me. Well, that was completely and utterly untrue. There was an Office of Fair Trading order made against HFC Bank in November 2010, which was covered up by Cameron because at that time he was making Stephen Green a lord. So it was buried. The order against the bank was buried in 2010. This is why Cameron is so involved in this cover-up, because it will destroy him if this comes out. So last year I discovered this collusion with HSBC and the FCA, and I blogged about it on the 30th of June last year. Now at that time there was a lot of speculation in the press about who was going to be the new chair of the trustees of the BBC. Seb Coe was one of them. I think Lord Hayward was. There were various people whose names were being bandied about in the press, but Rona Fairhead, nobody had heard of Rona Fairhead, and her name didn't come up at all. Then in July last year, that blog, just that blog, not my website, but just that blog, started being looked at by the BBC, by the Houses of Parliament, Bromley, with a Bromley link. Joe Johnson is the MP for Orpington, which is in the London Borough of Bromley. It was looked at by the FCA and HSBC, of course, and so on. And then it was announced at the end of August that Rona Fairhead was going to be the new chair of the trustees. Now, I have done various Freedom of Information Act requests to the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, who are responsible for appointing the chair of the trustees of the BBC. Because according to the information they have given me, because the recruitment company who apparently recruited Rona Fairhead is a company called Saxton Bamfield, a partner of which is the wife of the Director General of the BBC. Cynthia Hall is the wife of Tony Hall, who's the Director General of the BBC. Her firm was paid £36,000 to recruit Rona Fairhead. And that whole procedure apparently happened. First of all, I did a Freedom of Information Act request to the DCMS saying, how did you tender? Because any procurement, any government contract over £10,000 has to be put to tender. So I sent them a request saying, where did you advertise this tender? And they sent me a reply saying we advertised it in the standard government websites called Contract Finder, etc. So I had a look and I couldn't find it. So I went back to them and I said, can't find it. Can you tell me again where you advertised the tender? And they came back to me again and they said, oh, no, we didn't do it that way. We remembered now. What we did was we invited 8 firms individually, directly rather than advertising it. We invited 8 firms. Now, according to their dates, they invited 8 firms on, I think it was the 12th of May. They signed it that the contract for this job was dated the 24th of May. So within 12 days, they had invited 8 firms to tender for the work. They'd agreed terms with one firm, which happened to be the Director General's wife's firm. And they'd agreed the contract and signed the contract on the 24th of May last year, which was a Saturday on a bank holiday weekend. Mm. This is a civil service department. Also, every contract that you sign with the government for a procurement has to have a clause about the Bribery Act. That is a legal requirement. This contract doesn't have any such clause. I think the contract they've sent me is a fake.
Okay, yeah.
I have also sent them a Freedom of Information Act request asking for details of the 8 firms they invited to tender. They're stuck on that one. They keep buying themselves more time, and they're saying to me, we need to decide whether it's in the public interest for you to have this information. That appointment was illegal.
Yeah.
Unlawful. So, Rona Fairhead started at the BBC in October last year. In October last year, another director of HSBC Bank, Jonathan Evans, he was Sir Jonathan Evans, he used to be the head of MI5 in Britain. He's a director of HSBC now. He was made a lord in October last year, at the same time that Rona Fairhead started at the BBC. So he got his reward. She got her reward. Moving on to this earlier last year, the Sunday Times was doing a journalist, Tom Harper, who famously said recently, when to do with the Edward Snowden thing, he famously said, we just report what we believe to be the government's position. Tom Harper was looking into this fraud case and Cameron's cover-up. This was all in February last year. In February last year, the editor of the Sunday Times, Camilla Cavendish, went to a private meeting at Chequers with Cameron. The day before the Sunday Times article was due to come out, I emailed Tom Harper and said, have we got it in? He said, no, sorry. Usually with journalists, no explanation given, nothing. I'd worked with him for over a month on it. No explanation, no sorry. 2 months later, it was announced that Camilla Cavendish was now at the policy unit at number 10 Downing Street. That is what is going on. Cameron is covering up this fraud because he originally was involved in covering up the order, the OFT order, so that he could make Stephen Green a lord and put him into government and make him a trade minister. The head of the bank that was overseeing money laundering by Mexican drug cartels, financing Al-Qaeda, I've been monitoring HS. Obviously, I've got an interest in HS, and it seems to me they break the law in every single country that they trade in. No. But it's now the whole point of me talking about Rona Fairhead. The BBC don't report anything about HSBC. Recently, it was in the news that the FCA were not going to proceed with any action against HSBC for the tax evasion in Switzerland. It wasn't reported in the BBC. It was in all the other press, not in the BBC.
And then the FCA are also dropping the banking culture inquiry. That's something else that's been announced, yeah.
That was widely reported by the BBC because it didn't mention HSBC. And it was, it was main news on the BBC for the date when that was announced, just before Christmas. But it was announced on New Year's Eve. David Cameron's great-great-grandfather used to be the head of HSBC in Britain. He's got a whole long family history with HSBC. He's up to his neck in this fraud. And he's made two lords. There's Stephen Green and there's Jonathan Evans. He's put them into the House of Lords, and he's put an HSBC director to the head of the BBC. Now that Rona Faird, as you touched on earlier, Rona Faird was in charge of risk in the United States at the time they were prosecuted. Well, I'll tell you about the prosecution. At the time they paid a settlement figure of $1.9 billion for the money laundering. That came about because, as I understand, I have no evidence of this, but apparently a whistleblower in America has stated that Cameron had a meeting with Obama before the deferred prosecution period and pleaded with Obama not to prosecute HSBC because HSBC would have lost their license in America.
Yeah.
So he pleaded, and Loretta Lynch, who was at the head of the Securities Exchange Commission at that time, she agreed this deferred prosecution. So you see, the point of this whole thing, why Cameron is so involved, and MI5, I believe, is because the HSBC is on probation. They paid $1.9 billion, and they promised America that they wouldn't do anything wrong again. So if they get caught out with this fraud that I'm reporting, although it's not covered by the DPA, it will not look good. They could potentially lose their license in America. It will be disastrous for them. That is why Cameron and Osborne and Sajid Javid, the whole Tory financial powerhouse, is doing everything they can to stop this story coming out.
Okay. Now, can I ask you about what kind of support are you receiving? And I firstly just want to talk about in terms of support for your campaign against HSBC and to expose the truth. Do you have support within the House of Commons? Do you have opposition from the Labour benches?
I'd like to take this opportunity. Whenever I'm asked that question, I always say I get no support at all. But that's unfair to people who do support me, okay. such as family, close friends, and people on Twitter who support me, people who financially support me on Twitter. Twice now I've faced repossession of my property, and I'm facing it again because I can't pay my mortgage. People on Twitter have bailed me out, and I've paid off the arrears. So I get fantastic support, from Twitter and other people. But officially, none whatsoever, no. And I haven't had any.
So there's been nothing from the opposition benches?
No.
Those who are...
No, I told Ed Miliband about this when he came to Hastings about 3 years ago after, I don't know, Hastings had won the... I don't know. He came to Hastings, and I told him, I confronted him in the street. I told him about this fraud. He did nothing. I've written to Jeremy Corbyn about 2 years ago because a friend of mine in London knows Corbyn, and I wrote to him. He's done nothing. I mean, Labour are no better than the Tories, except the Tories have all these connections, and the Tories are the people who are supporting the banks. But Labour know about it. They do nothing. I have no support in Parliament. I'll make one exception. There's a Tory MP, Jesse Norman. Hello?
Don't worry, the viewers can't hear that.
Okay. There's a Tory MP, surprisingly, Jesse Norman, and he used to sit on the Treasury Select Committee. This is interesting, actually. He sat on the Treasury Select Committee last year, and he did grill the FCA about this cover-up, about the whole thing with the FCA and the HSBC cover-up, and he grilled them, and there's a film of that on my website. But he's now, after the election, he's now the chair of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee. So I've been grilling. I've been saying to him, you must investigate this Fairhead appointment. It is irregular. It's illegal. And he's written to me recently, and again, I put everything on my website. That's on my website. He's just whitewashed it. Basically, he said, "Oh, the rules don't allow us to do things like that." So that's what every MP says. They just read you the rules and say, "This is what the rules say." So there's nothing for you to worry about. That's like saying, if you're stopped for speeding on the motorway, you say to a policeman, "Well, the speed limit's 70 miles an hour, so of course I couldn't have been going 90." That's how MPs think. Yeah. I mean, I've had no support, from MPs. Okay. I wrote to every MP about 3 months ago. Every MP, 650 of them. I got 5 responses, out of which 2 of them lied. that's the extent of the help I get from Parliament.
Okay.
Even Caroline Lucas, even the obvious people you might think would be interested, not one bit of help.
Okay. Okay, if you've got questions for Nicholas, please use the text box at the bottom, send your questions in. Kevin might have some questions that we're going to put to you in just a moment. So just before that, how has this been affecting you on a personal level? I mean, obviously, this is not something that's easy. It's you know, you don't have a job. You did describe how you've had a lot of difficulty actually finding work despite your level of education, ability, etc.
I've lost everything. I mean, I've had to sell anything I had of value. I had a motorbike. I had a small collection of pottery, Chinese, Japanese pottery, which I've sold. I've sold artworks. I've sold everything. I had recording because of being a musician. I had recording equipment, and so I've sold all that. At the moment, I'm hanging on to pay my mortgage. I mean, I want to stay in the house I'm in. It's a very small house, but it's in Hastings. It's by the sea, and it suits me, and I'm determined to keep it. But you know, I'm going to have to go back on Twitter and ask for donations again, because at the moment I had thought, you know, after the Complaints Commissioner decision against the FCA, I had thought they'd make me an ex gratia payment, because they do in every other case. And I thought that would pay off my mortgage arrears. But they haven't. They haven't made me a payment because they hate me so much. So I'm going to have to go begging again. And I've been extremely depressed. I haven't played the piano for 2 years. I mean, all the interests I used to have, I don't have them anymore. I just spend all my time on Twitter and campaigning.
And is it crowdfunding that you use to... Do you do crowdfund for income?
No, I'm on benefits. I'm on I can't remember what it's called. Employment support. ESA. Yes. Yeah. No, I only crowdfund to when I'm facing repossession, which has happened twice now.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
How successful do you think the system of crowdfunding for repossession? Is there something you can sustain? I mean, have you got that kind of level of support that you can keep
what
doing?
Happens, I mean, I could say last year. Now, in 2014 was the worst year, because I had an Atos assessment, and I was thrown off benefits. So for 4 months, I had no income whatsoever. And at the same time, my mortgage company, which incidentally is NRAM, which was the first, Northern Rock, which was the first bank that was bailed out by the government, and my property is now owned by the government. But they were repossessing me, so I was going through a period with no income at all, facing repossession, and that's when I crowdfunded on Twitter, and people donated enough for me to pay off the arrears, so I got the proceedings thrown out, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
But then what happens is, because the ESA I'm on, it pays part of my mortgage, but it doesn't pay the whole mortgage. It only pays, about 2/3 of it. So every month I have mortgage arrears building up again. So every now and again they start repossession proceedings. I mean, I've tried to explain my circumstances and that they will improve, but they're not interested. Government, they've said to me, it's in the taxpayer's interest to repossess me. Well, at the moment, the taxpayer is paying about £400 a month for my mortgage. If I was repossessed, I could claim up to £1,000 a month for housing benefit. Doesn't make much sense to me. Yeah, but they seem to be determined to repossess me. So, questions.
Well, yeah. If we do have questions from the viewers, then now's the time. What's your advice to other people who are in a similar situation? I think in the past you have said, just don't get involved. It's not worth it. The system's so corrupt. Do you still hold to that advice?
Yeah. If it's...
Or is it a case of think very, very carefully, make sure you've got a strategy beforehand? Would you have done things differently if you could go back?
No, if I'd known what was going to happen, I wouldn't have done it. My attitude now to whistleblowing is it depends on the circumstances. Obviously, if you work in the NHS and you see things which are life-threatening, you've got to do something. Or if you work on a building site and you see something which is dangerous and life-threatening, you have to do something. But if it's money, if it's banks and money, my advice would be to walk away, because they are they are the masters of the universe. They own the government. They own the media. You will not. Well, I'm winning, but that's because I'm a pig-headed bastard. But they have destroyed me in the process, and that it's just not worth it. I would say if I'd known what I now know, what I would have done is left and got another job somewhere else and then blown the whistle. But I just thought it would be easy to get a job. I was so naive. I thought because I'm being honest, lots of lawyers will employ me.
Yeah.
That's how naive I was. I thought, well, lawyers are honest. They'll employ me because I've been honest.
And the thing is about trying to get
I just mentioned there is one firm that has employed me, and not so long ago I worked for a firm called Lead A & Co. As a consultant for a period. We were planning a group action against the bank, but that had to come to an end because of reasons I can't discuss. But it was a conflict of interest arose. But I'm mentioning them because it's been in the news today that they've been reported to the Solicitors Disciplinary Tribunal because Lead A are constantly taking the government to court. And they took the government to court over Iraqi nationals being tortured by the British Army, and they lost. And so they've been reported. The government hate Lead A because they're always challenging government legislation. But they employed me. They gave me a job. But they're the only people.
Okay, well, we're going to diverge slightly with the questions here. So we've got Derek, we've also got Alessio, and they're quite interested to know what you think about Bitcoin and what kind of a threat a new cryptocurrency can be to organisations like HSBC. So do you have an opinion on that, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin in particular?
I don't know a lot about cryptocurrency. I hope it's what all its adherents claim it to be, in the sense that we can do away with borders, we can do away with banks, and we can all. But my limited experience of it at the moment is there are a lot of people involved that want to be very rich, and it seems to me just another banking system. I'm not going to name names, but it seems that people who are involved in cryptocurrency have an agenda, and it makes me suspicious, to be honest.
Okay.
But I also, I hasten to add, I don't understand mining. I do understand what cryptocurrency is. I know what blockchain is, but I don't understand mining, and I don't understand the technical side of cryptocurrency.
Okay. Kevin's made a very good point. It sounds like HSBC are used as a tool of UK foreign policy, which is basically why the establishment's doing nothing about them. I mean, that would play into the John Perkins, the corporatocracy model that we've discussed every now and again. Essentially, UK foreign policy is an extension of the economic empire.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you? Have you read John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman?
I haven't, but as I said before, I'm taking a lot of interest in HSBC, and last year normally their annual general meeting is in May. Last year the election was in May, so they brought it forward to April, and they announced that they were going to leave the UK. So they wanted to affect the election, which they did. The Tories got in again, and immediately George Osborne abolished the bank levy for HSBC. I mean, and recently there's these deals that were done with China. Yeah. This is what I'm going to say now could be controversial, but it's been reported in Bloomberg. There's huge capital outflows coming out of China. The wealthy people in China are getting their money out quick. And in Bloomberg, it says one of the main conduits for this is HSBC in Hong Kong. And it's another form of money laundering. Wherever they operate, you can be sure they're doing something dodgy. But they basically control this government and the media, well, certainly the BBC.
Yeah, and as Andrew Feinstein, the writer Andrew Feinstein has said, you're not taking on HSBC, you're taking on the establishment.
Yeah, that's what I've learned. I mean, there's another quote that somebody has used on Twitter. I didn't know when I reported my firm to the Law Society that this would go up to David Cameron. I mean, the reason it's gone up to when I reported it wasn't It didn't go up to David Cameron, but as I said before, the Office of Fair Trading made an order against the bank in 2010. I mean, I think I should just mention this, that the order against the bank was signed by the OFT on the 17th of November. But it wasn't published, it was just signed on that date. On the 16th of November, it was announced that David Cameron was making Stephen Green, the chair of HSBC, a lord.
Yeah.
And then on the 22nd of November, Stephen Green was introduced to the House of Lords. Formally, he was made a lord. On the 22nd of November, the Office of Fair Trading issued a press release. The press release was about charging orders. Nothing to do with these collection charges, which is the fraud that I've been talking about. And at the bottom of this press release, as an attachment, as a footnote, there was a PDF attachment, which was a copy of the order against HFC Bank, telling them to stop adding these collection charges. So it was buried away. It wasn't reported by any of the media. Nobody picked it up, apart from me, because I'm obviously taking an interest. So it was buried. This order, I mean, and as I've said, it's £1 billion fraud. That was buried by Cameron. Also, there's been speculation. How much did Cameron know about the Swiss leaks when he made Stephen Green a lord? I mean, that Falciani CD, I mean, that was 2007. And I think the HMRC had it from beginning of 2010. I mean, it's inconceivable that Cameron wouldn't have known about it. But he certainly, I mean, I believe he certainly knew about the OFT order.
Absolutely. Very good point here. Question here from Ali Stewart. What can citizens who have been defrauded by HSBC do to reclaim their money, even though the fraud has not been acknowledged by the regulator? Is there something that they can do right now? And can you help?
Yeah, well, yes, AI can help. Now, there's another interesting thing about the media here. The Sunday Times, the Sunday Mirror is one of the few mainstream media that did write about this, and they wrote about it sometime last summer. But it was a very odd article. It appeared on page 8. I'm answering the question here. It appeared on page 8. It didn't mention me, which is not in itself important, but they wheeled in a celebrity, or somebody called Liz Barkley, she's on You and Yours or something, and she advised people to go to the Financial Ombudsman. Well, maybe. I've helped people get money back through the Financial Ombudsman, but the Financial Ombudsman are not brilliant. They take years. I mean, basically, what I would say is to people is to contact me initially, because I still have it in mind to do a group action. And if people contact me, and if I had a database of people that had a good claim, I could go to any firm of solicitors in London and say, let's just issue proceedings, because I've done all the work. And I think the best way is through group action, because the other problem is, if people still have money, if people still owe money on the loan, the ombudsman, the financial ombudsman, allows the bank to offset the charges against the outstanding balance. Now, in law, that's wrong, which I won't go into for technical reasons. And in PPI claims, they don't do that either. So I would recommend not going to the financial ombudsman. Okay. I recommend coming to me.
Okay, no, that's perfect. Thank you. Jilly Giffen, can people who have used HFC, i.e. HSBC, because it was a subsidiary of HSBC, who've used HFC credit card services via John Lewis, have a case for a claim? So that would be a John Lewis store card.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is important. I've recently reported John Lewis to the Financial Conduct Authority, because I've talked a lot tonight about the OFT order, but the OFT order was against HFC. But the John Lewis accounts, John Lewis Financial, when HFC and HSBC bought John Lewis, they set up a new company called John Lewis Financial Services Limited. That is an HSBC company. It's got nothing to do with HFC. So they are still in existence. You say HFC no longer exists as a bank, but John Lewis Financial Services certainly do, and HSBC certainly does. So I don't know if John Lewis stopped adding these illegal charges in 2010 when HFC did or not. But if the questioner, if she defaulted on an account before 2010, and only if the claim was referred to these solicitors, Waitmans or Restons, then they would have added these charges, yes, and she would have a claim.
Okay. No, that's brilliant. Thank you. Good question from Derek here. Aside from the big frauds, can you explain how HSBC were just ripping off everyday customers? So just, I mean, basically, how was this happening? Just on an everyday level.
Well, look, HFC and HSBC, but HFC ran the store accounts for Dixon's, Curry's, PC World, Furniture Village, B&Q, Courts, who no longer exist. So basically, if you had a store card with any of those companies, and John Lewis, but that was HSBC, or if you had an HFC loan account, or if you had an account with a company called Beneficial Finance, if you defaulted, they sent the debt to solicitors, and then the solicitors added on these illegal charges. So anybody who's, I mean, it's half the major well-known high street stores in the UK, basically. Yeah. And if you defaulted, and so they were, but the important thing to understand about HFC is they were originally an American company, Household Finance Corporation. They targeted subprime people. They targeted poor people. Yeah. Lent them, made them loans which no other bank would have given them, charged them a huge amount of interest, and then if they defaulted, and they had what's called front-loaded interest. So if you were borrowed £5,000 over 5 years, yeah, and you defaulted after 2 years, they'd sue you for something like £18,000 because they would add on all the interest that you would have paid over the 5 years, and then on top of that £18,000, they would have added the collection charge of 16.4%. So some of these charges I'm talking about, they're not like bank charges. Some of these charges are £5,000 or £6,000 that were added on to people's debts.
This is worse than the criminal moneylender gangsters that go around breaking people's fingers. Yeah. And these are the you know.
Well, it's worse than Wonga. Wonga were fined last year by the FCA, yeah, for doing exactly this. But Wonga were charging people £50. These people were charging up to £6,000. HSBC.
These are the poorest people, the poorest, yeah, bottom of society, don't have earning capacity.
I know people that have lost their. I know people that have lost their homes because the other thing they did is if you owned a property, because the solicitors would rather not sue you because the solicitors paid all the legal costs, so they didn't want to risk losing that money. So rather than sue you, the solicitors would say, let us put a charge on your property. And then if you didn't pay it, they'd force a sale of your house. And I've known people that have lost their properties.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, are there any more questions coming in from the viewers there, Kevin? Yeah, there's something coming in. So just hold on a little second. Just but I mean, this is like it's like the poverty industry. You know, the people at the very top are rich, but the money that's coming to them is coming from the absolute bottom. It's just being sucked from the bottom right to the top, and that's probably what's most disgusting about it, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to have a question in just a moment. So, I mean, how does this affect people? Do you think? I mean, what kind of impact is it having on families and?
Well, I mean, the problem, David, with this is it's so old now. I mean, I told the bank in 2003 what they were doing was illegal. So it's now 13 years on, and still people haven't. So, the people who have been affected, the chances of getting their money back are getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. I mean, there's no problem with limitation when people say it's, yeah, in this case, the limitation is 12 years from the date of discovery. So there is no problem, but the problem is documentation. People are not going to have the papers anymore.
Yeah.
So it makes it, and HSBC know this. I'll tell you something else HSBC did. The Office of Fair Trading doesn't exist anymore. The FCA have taken over the powers of the Office of Fair Trading. They took them over in April last year. But they also, as well as taking on those powers, they also had extra powers which allowed them to order redress, ordering banks to repay people. The OFT were never allowed to do that, but the FCA can. So HSBC surrendered HFC's credit license before April last year so that they couldn't be ordered by the FCA to repay people.
Okay. We've got two questions here. I think we might just make these the last two and we can maybe tie them together. So Derek is asking, How do we force the inquiry to be reopened without a loaded panel? So how can it possibly be fair? And Craig Sheridan, what does a satisfactory conclusion look like? So what do we? How can this be done fairly? And what would be the ideal outcome if we can get it?
Well, I might be being naive, but I'm hoping now, because of the public interest, that HSBC will put their hands up and say, like Cash Genie have today, put their hands up and say, we're going to repay people. Yeah. But if they're determined to put up a fight, then I will just carry on campaigning. I will carry on making sure that the FCA do the proper job. I do know somebody who actually is sort of on the inside with the FCA. He doesn't work for the FCA, but I won't mention who he is, but he's an ally, and he's my eyes and ears, and he can make sure that the FCA do this properly. And basically, if they don't, then I will go to the High Court. I will go for a judicial review, because this has got to be done. And then I'm hoping, after the FCA have done their job and HSBC have repaid people, then I want the Solicitors Regulation Authority to do their job properly, and I want the solicitors involved in this to be prosecuted. There are about 10 people, in my view, that should be in prison for this. It's simple fraud. If a plumber charged somebody cash so he didn't have to pay VAT, he'd go to prison. Why are the banks allowed to do this? Yeah.
No, well, these rules are only for the people at the bottom who are essentially creating the wealth for those at the top. Okay, well, there's been a wonderful interview. There's been a lot that we've got out of this. Craig is also asking, would you be okay to write a blog for Independence Live?
Yeah. I mean, give me a subject.
Blog basically on what we've been discussing here. We can have it on our
not the whole thing, no, because the whole thing is a book. If you ask Craig to give me a specific subject, then I'll be happy to. But I'm not going to write about the whole thing, because
stay on the line, okay? After we finish, so just sort that one out. Yes, Kevin, we can hear you. One question. Okay. Alessio. Okay, right. So those of us who don't have faith in banks, where is it best to invest your money? Would you? I would suggest credit union. What would you suggest? We're talking here about investment.
I'm not a financial expert or a financial advisor. I would know. I mean, I would say yes, credit unions. I would certainly avoid any of the high street banks. Okay. There's an organisation who I'm friendly with called Move Your Money. I would approach them and ask their advice, because they basically monitor which banks are ethical and which banks, support the arms trade or whatever. So, I would take advice from a green or a sustainable organisation which cares about these things. But I can't give that advice. I'm not an expert.
Oh. Okay, there's one more question coming in, so just hold on. Okay. So on your website, do you have a list of all the high street stores and the store cards that have had these charges added, so that people can look and see whether they're
what's the caller's name?
Affected by this?
Sorry.
Do you have on your website? Do you have all the stores and store cards?
Well, it is there somewhere. But I was going to say tomorrow I will pull it all together and I'll do a blog tomorrow for the caller to have a look at. So it'll be up there tomorrow.
Okay, fantastic. Okay.
It's spread out. I mean, there's about 300 pages on my website now, so it's there somewhere. But I'll find it all and pull it together and do a blog tomorrow.
That's fantastic. Okay, so
I can ask you another.
I think we can draw things to a close just now. I want to say thanks very much to all the people that have tuned in tonight and you've asked questions. That's been fantastic. Thanks once again to everybody who helped with our crowdfunder. Recently, we managed to get over the £4,500 2 days ahead of target, so that was absolutely fantastic. Nicholas, it's been a real privilege to have you on. Thanks very much for all everything that you've given us here tonight. I think it's been very valuable. So from me, David McGowan, I'm going to thank Kevin, who's been doing the technical support, and Nicholas Wilson. So Independence Live, catch you soon. Peace.
Thank you.